So my name is Gil Haberman, and in this session, we're going to talk about some do's and don'ts of hybrid cloud. I'm from Nutanix, where we've been working on hybrid cloud deployments with many customers for a number of years. And so we thought this would be a fun session to share with you some of our insights. And of course, some of those insights shaped our own portfolio. So we're going to find ways to address some of these don'ts. So first, I'm sure you've seen a lot of hybrid cloud around and you've heard in this conference. But just to frame a little bit, give you a sense, we ask our prospects and customers like yourselves, more than 2,000 every year, hey, what are your intentions for the next few years? And hybrid cloud is definitely emerging as the most important strategic initiatives that customers have. I think also we're moving in the past maybe 6 to 12 months and going forward from hybrid being a buzzword to customers actually looking to deploy. And you can see here that customers have talked about having maybe 80% of environments being hybrid, but very aggressively looking to move to 41% within 2 years. That really states the intention to truly adopt a hybrid environment for many or all applications, and that requires quite a few changes in most organizations. So let's start with a few don'ts. Very light, but these are some things that come up very often. The first is the notion of approaching AWS separate from what you have on-prem and effectively creating silos. So maybe you have on-prem traditionally, you start adopting AWS, and then you basically do that organically on the sidelines. And the outcome is that now you're ending up with a different set of tools, practices, maybe even teams. And so it's becoming increasingly challenging to actually have a single hybrid cloud strategy going forward. The other really common thing that we hear is about security and specifically compliance. So if you've heard of the famous cases of Capital One, Dow Jones, and Accenture recently, most of these data breaches that we hear about are actually not about hardcore security or AWS. They're actually mostly about operational practices. Mostly on-prem, customers have very rigorous practices around compliance. But as they adopt within AWS, there may not be at the same level of compliance and rigor. So you see here, people leaving databases wide open, right? Unencrypted, no password. So really, really easy and simple things that simply is not within scope right now because this organic adoption was really without this corporate governance. And so that is something that needs to be addressed. And finally, from an operational perspective, what we often see is, again, as customers adopt in AWS, they have separate operational processes to deploy, manage, govern, optimize, and that is different than what you have on-prem. And so again, this creates this divide. And what we should be shooting for is finding a way to more holistically look at on-prem and AWS together, and therefore drive this hybrid cloud strategy going forward. Okay, so let's talk about a few do's and how we approach these problems. Each of them is important, of course, but we're also going to talk more holistically at the end. So first, in terms of application, deployment, lifecycle management, self-service, what we advise customers to do is to find a way, both from a team process perspective and also the tooling, like Nutanix provides, to standardize operations across private and public. So what we advise is really to capture application deployment, including the lifecycle management, in a simple template that we call blueprint. And that blueprint is repeatable. So when you use that blueprint, you know it's consistent and reliable. And the same blueprint, in our case, blueprints within COM, is going to be applicable for both on-prem or public cloud. And so now you're in a position where you can repeat this in any cloud, and you can decide for each team, based on budget or needs, what they can deploy on which cloud and with what kind of cost mechanism that is allowed. So you're moving to a path where the underlying cloud is not what matters. It's really about driving the same operational consistency. You can see here that what we also do is provide this very simple way to provide self-service. So this is the view of an end user who comes in and based on their roles and permissions can see what applications they can deploy. And again, based on IT's control and governance, they can either deploy on-prem, in AWS, or both. Now, similarly, you can move towards having a single dashboard or centralized management of your cost optimization and maybe more broadly, resource planning. So what we do, we have a tool that looks into all the resources in AWS across all the accounts and on-prem and pretty much shows you, first of all, in a single view, what's happening. And then, in the case of AWS, start providing optimizational proposals. Maybe there's unused resources that haven't been used for many months or years, or missized VMs or other instances. All these can be fixed in one click. One of the important things that customers in their early days can do is simply move to reserve instances, save a lot of money. Simply, maybe the organization has not thought about that. Now the tooling can help do that. And you can see that the same tool can provide on-prem, AWS, maybe other clouds as well. And so with that, you're now in a position where you can see for each business unit what is their consumption, how they consume against the budget, and really just figure out what's happening around this sprawl overall. And then finally, if you look forward, the idea would be that we actually automate cost control so that now you have policies that basically say if you see anomaly, if you see someone getting out of budget or on the way to get out of budget, based on machine learning, we'll be able to alert the users and pretty much flag this before it happens. Because we often hear from customers that bills were really out of control, not really because of straight up consumption, but because people forgot or consumed more than they really need. Now, from a security perspective, I touched on that. Really, the idea would be to bring the same rigor that you have in terms of practices on-prem to AWS as well. And so what we do is, again, integrate into the AWS accounts along with on-prem and look into, in an automated fashion, the compliance that is relevant to you. There's a lot of standard automated audits that we perform, looking for open ports, unencrypted databases, things of that nature. And then if we find those, we alert and we can provide one click to fix. Also, the other thing that is really interesting to most customers is the notion of custom audits. So you can customize what these checks are going to look like and then scan routinely across both private and public clouds. So again, you're basically moving towards a model where things are standardized. So to some extent, this tooling was tactical, different aspects of addressing the needs to better operationalize and govern these different clouds. Now let's talk about what we refer to as the true hybrid cloud platform and what we believe is very helpful for customers more strategically. And what we really want to drive is consistency. Consistency of infrastructure, of tooling, and so therefore practices as well. And the way we do that, in our minds, is to provide a single hybrid cloud platform. The way we view the world, if there were such a platform that can span these multiple clouds, then you'll now be able to have seamless movement from on-prem to AWS and vice versa. Ideally, you would want to integrate into AWS accounts. So you have a single platform for both of these types of workloads, but at the same time, when you're looking into AWS, you see all the resources across both cloud native and traditional. And then ideally, if you have such a platform, we want to drive towards a change in consumption model. So there would be license portability, so you know that this software you're running on today is in one cloud, but in the future it can move with you to other clouds, and really support the notion of cloud optionality over time. So it's about this consistency of constructs and skill sets and licenses in this case. So let's talk a little bit about how we do that. What we basically offer is Nutanix clusters on AWS. So our software runs on top of storage and compute, collapsing everything. So you run your virtual machines on top of that single pool of resources. In terms of on-prem, what customers used to do is buy a few nodes, run the software, the VMs on top, and then scale out whenever you want. The software manages the data placement, compute, and so on. Now, you can do the same thing on AWS bare metal. So the same software runs on AWS bare metal instances, and so literally the same virtual machines can now run either on-prem or in AWS. So to some extent, this is an extension from on-prem to AWS, and that is relevant primarily to customers who have significant mission-critical or business-critical applications that are not easily migrated by replatforming. So what you get with this kind of deployment is first consistent operations. And I think what matters the most is not straight up the virtual machines. It's that you often, I believe, had integrated with third-party software. You have troubleshooting practices in place. And so if you are unable to port this to AWS, it becomes challenging. But with this type of solution, it's really the same platform. Everything identically can now move into AWS. So you don't longer need to manage hardware, but you still maintain all your operational practices, troubleshooting, and so on. Now, we also integrate into AWS accounts, as I mentioned before. So that means that if you have AWS credits, you can use those credits for these bare metal instances from AWS. At the same time, again, you're able to migrate applications whenever you want. And when we are running within AWS VPCs, we believe this would lead to much better performance relative to competition. And this direct access means that you can have direct access to cloud-native applications. So if you have a traditional application that simply needs to run in AWS and then alongside offload some cloud-native services to support that, then that's really, really easy. You're within the same VPC. No need to change really anything in order to facilitate that. OK, so what are some of the common use cases we hear from customers around clusters? The first is migration. So I want to get out of managing infrastructure business, and so I want to migrate to AWS, but it's very challenging to go through the process of replatforming. So this is an easy way to utilize our software to run on-prem and then migrate to AWS bare metal instances, especially for mission-critical applications. We've been doing mission-critical for a long time, and so running there on bare metal would work absolutely fine. And as I mentioned before, doing that without a lot of lift in terms of changing and retooling and so on. Similarly, we hear a lot of data center consolidation. So either organizations who have, through acquisitions, end up with a sprawl of data centers looking to consolidate, or wanting to eliminate some of the regional data centers. One option, of course, is to build a new data center to collapse everything there. But again, if you don't want to do that and incur the CapEx, but you still want to run the same types of applications, you can now basically collapse everything into AWS bare metal instances in any region where bare metal instances are supported, which is most regions. So that's a really easy solution to both address regional needs as well as, in general, data center consolidation needs. And then finally, this notion of bursting. So we've heard this a lot in the past, but the issue is if you have, let's say, on-prem applications or VDI instances, and you want to burst to public cloud, enjoying the benefits of the easy scale of AWS, when the environments are different, it's pretty challenging because your actual application is not really set up to burst out to different types of environment with different networking and so on. But here, what's happening is that you really have the same software running with the same VPN and VPCs integrated. And so the outcome is if you want to run on-prem, but then burst into AWS using for seasonal requirements or for high peak load requirements, then it's really, really easy because it's truly the same environment. Using our VPN, it's even keeping the same IPs. So really trivial to do that. And so that is a really good use case for using cloud in general and AWS specifically. OK, so this was a really short presentation, really focused. We want to, of course, hear from you more at our booth. And this is my email if you have any questions to ask me over email. And before that, I'm happy to spend a few minutes with you guys. We have 4 or 5 minutes left to talk about questions you might have, either on hybrid in general or Nutanix specifically.
And if you do have a question, if you'd like to raise your hand, I will happily bring you the microphone so everybody can hear the question. Anybody? Questions? Got one back here.
Or you can just leave, don't worry. It's fine.
Thanks, Gil, for the presentation.
Sure.
I come from a very regulated financial institution, and we are in the process of moving to cloud now. And for regulatory reasons, we are required to set up our infrastructure in 2 different clouds, AWS and something else, say Google. So do you have an offering that actually makes it transparent for client to work in 2 different cloud offerings?
Yes, so this is what I mentioned in the second half of the conversation. Nutanix Clusters aims to do exactly that. So you run the same software, our software, whether it's different hardware vendors on-prem, AWS bare metal instances, or other public clouds bare metal instances, very, very soon coming. I mean, it's around the corner, and then it would be absolutely seamless because of the reason I mentioned, that you have literally the same software that's running the same VMs, and so it's very predictable in terms of moving those. Yeah, so it would be actually just replicating, which is, of course, a function of our software anyway, replicating to a different place, and that's it.
Any other questions? Anyone? Just raise your hand. I'll bring you the microphone. All right. I think we're good.
All right. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Gil. And again, if you'd like to visit Nutanix, you can go check them out there in 2037. 2037 is their booth number. Thanks, everybody.